Boggs didn't put anything in Andy's mouth. And neither did
Hollywood's obsession with remaking classic movies has been an age-old tradition. Franchise formation has long been a strategic marketing move to attract a large audience back to the movie theater repeatedly. With this trend becoming much trendier than before, it has reached a point where sequels and reboots are getting more screen time than non-franchise films. Consequently, we have to tolerate some unnecessary reboots that don't do justice to its predecessors. So now, we don't want the same thing to happen to a genre-defining masterpiece of the early 90s. Shawshank Redemption. Now, you must be wondering if anyone has really thought of remaking this film, and the answer is yes. Several tweets and fan-made content are all over the internet, showing interest in a possible reboot of this iconic film. However, needless to say, that if a reboot is to be made, it'll just be a big bummer. That's why in today's video, we're going to talk about why there's no need to make a franchise out of Shawshank Redemption, a movie that's best to be left as a standalone. Released in 1994, Shawshank Redemption was based on Stephen King's novella, Rita Hayworth, and Shawshank Redemption, a prison break story that quickly caught the attention of Frank Darabont, who wanted to proceed with its film adaptation. Initially, several big names were attached to the film, including Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, and even Clint Eastwood. However, Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman ultimately became the lead cast of the film, making it an unforgettable experience to watch their phenomenal chemistry as Andy and Red. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I got no choice.
Brooks, you're not going to hurt Hayward.
The original story's finality. Andy Dufresne, a banker, was convicted of killing his wife and her lover and sentenced to life imprisonment in Shawshank State Prison. There, he befriended a smuggler, Ellis Boyd Red Redding, who managed to get a rock hammer and a poster of Rita Hayworth for Andy. Shawshank Penitentiary was a dangerous place where inmates were not at all safe, as Andy got sexually assaulted by a gang called the Sisters, led by Boggs Diamond, who got severely beaten by Hadley and was sent to a hospital. The jail ward, Samuel Norton, tasked Andy with the responsibility of taking care of the prison library to help out an elderly inmate, Mr. Brooks Hatland. However, what seemed like a rehabilitation program for Andy was nothing but a clever way of utilizing his advice to solve the financial problems of the warden and other prison staff. After a decade, Samuel Norton began exploiting prisoners to use them for public work, while also profiting a large sum of money by getting bribes and money laundering orchestrated by Andy under the fake alias of Randall Stevens. 2 years later, he befriended another inmate named Tommy Williams, who told him that his previous cellmate had confessed to him about murdering a banker's wife and her lover, the two murders Andy was convicted of. He took that information to Norton, asking him to process his parole, but Norton refused to do that, as Andy was involved in the money laundering case that could drag his name as well into the mud. Therefore, Norton faked Tommy Williams' escape attempt from the prison and killed him in the process, while sending Andy to a solitary prison cell where Andy was confined for 2 months. After his release, he talked to Red about his desire to live in a coastal town in Mexico, where he'd like to start his life afresh. He also asked Red to come to Buxton after his parole, where he'd bury a package for Red to find. Red initially thought that Andy might have gone suicidal, but the next day, they found out that Andy had escaped jail through a secret tunnel he had dug for over 19 years with the use of his rock hammer. After his successful attempt at escape, he took his fake identity of Randall Stevens and withdrew some money that he had once laundered inside the jail. Afterwards, he sent the ledger to a local newspaper, exposing Hadley's dark secrets, leading the police to come to arrest the warden. But Hadley shot himself to death to evade arrest. After Red was finally released from prison, he went to Buxton as promised to Andy, who had really left him a cachet full of money and an invitation letter for him to join Andy in that Mexican coastal town, Zihuatanejo. Red kept his promise, and by breaking the terms of his parole, he went to the town to meet his friend Andy, who welcomed him with open arms. The film ended with a hopeful conclusion for both Andy and Red, who had once endured the terrible consequences of their actions. However, the film ends with the message that if someone wants to redeem themselves, life gives them another opportunity to live. The actual novella, written by the master storyteller, Stephen King, wasn't much different from the adaptation. The story was told from the perspective of Red, who was an Irish American in the source material. Later, he met with Andy in the Shawshank State Prison, and then the story followed similarly to the film and concluded on that same hopeful note, giving both Andy and Red an emotional closure in their respective narrative journey. Therefore, it's needless to say how both the source and its adaptation were self-contained stories that need no further sequel or franchise. Developmental history. Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption deviates from Stephen King's usual genre, published in 1982 by Viking Press in his collection of different seasons, and later included in Stephen King Goes to the Movies in 2009. This novella became one of the best literary pieces of Stephen King, famous for his gripping ghost stories and mystery thrillers. Stephen King went out of his comfort zone to write a story that focuses on real human perils and characters struggling to move on from their past to a hopeful future. Darabont bought the rights for this adaptation in 1987, but the film's production began 5 years later in 1993. Darabont completed the scripting in 8 weeks and managed to get $25 million as a production budget from Castle Rock Entertainment. But despite getting critical acclaim, the film didn't do well at the box office, earning only $16 million upon its initial release. Although Tim and Morgan's legendary performances brought some viewers to the theater, they had box office clashes with Tarantino's Pulp Fiction and Tom Hanks' Forrest Gump, releasing at the same time and making history. Furthermore, Shawshank initially failed to lure the audience to the theater because of such a big and confusing title and the absence of any female characters in the story. But the film went beyond these petty factors and got nominated for several award ceremonies, including Academy Award nominations. Later, a re-release of the film made a total of $73 million at the box office. Upon its award nominations and amazing reviews, a huge number of VHS rental copies were sold throughout the nation. The film gradually received its worldwide popularity, becoming one of the highest-rated movies on IMDb. The Shawshank Redemption was not a fun flick blockbuster because it takes time for such a film to grow on the audience, for them to really like and appreciate it, and that's why it didn't work at the time of its release, but rather went on to become a cult classic. Now, a sequel in the name of Shawshank might bring a large audience to the theater, but it's questionable whether a reboot would live up to our expectations. No sequel and King's source material. Stephen King's horror stories, like It and Carrie, were not only adapted into films, but many sequels and reboots have been made on these stories. King sometimes didn't like the adaptations, further opposing its several franchise developments. However, King himself had written a novel series called Dark Tower, which also got its film adaptation in 2017. He didn't have any problem with his adaptation turning into a franchise, only when the mythological elements or the characters of the story demanded it. But in Shawshank Redemption, that was never the case. It was not a horror story that needed further exploration in a sequel. Also, the characters in this story received a complete arc, leaving no material for a sequel to cover. Therefore, it's been pretty clear from the start that Shawshank Redemption is just a prison escape story that shouldn't be treated as a franchise foundation. Industry attitudes don't mess with perfection. It's highly unlikely that Shawshank Redemption will ever get a reboot because big studios are smart enough to avoid a risk like that. First of all, the film has an iconic status as well as a cult recognition, with names like Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman attached to it. Their solid performances are irreplaceable that no future reboot should dare to compete with. Also, with making such decisions comes the fear of backlash as to how people would interpret it. There are several cult films which have been reimagined by new filmmakers, but they didn't work well at the box office, like Blade Runner 2049, a reboot to the 1982 original Blade Runner, which might have gotten critical acclaim due to its breathtaking cinematography and visual effects, but it was a box office failure. Similar things happened when the studios tried to reboot already famous films like Ghostbusters, The Mummy, RoboCop, Ben-Hur, and even Gus Van Sant's poor attempt to make Psycho in 1998. These are some of the biggest examples of how reboots became epic failures. That's why, to preserve the legacy, Warner Brothers has maintained the rights for such gems of a film like Shawshank, preventing any other studios from laying their eyes on it. Fan theories, hoaxes, and jokes. If scrolling Reddit comments is your favorite activity, then you might have heard of Shawshank Redemption, or Two Shaw, One Shank, the infamous parody discussions. Conspiracy theories about Andy and Red still being hunted by police in Mexico City, or Red finally getting a chance in Hollywood to star in a film called Shawshank Redemption, are some of the craziest ideas for a reboot that fans have come up with. Reddit threads are always a fun place to find these kinds of hilarious theories, jokes, and parodies about imaginary reboots and sequels. And Shawshank wasn't spared either from such profoundly intellectual debate amongst the greatest minds of Reddit. People were misled by many fan-made posters and trailers about Shawshank's reboot, leading many users to ask for a proper answer. While some fans assured this information to be fake and misleading, some others poke fun at it by coming up with weird parodies and plausible plot developments in a reboot. further confusing the audience who fail to understand the sarcastic undertone. Basically, these are nothing but fans making fun of Hollywood's tradition of making franchise films just to get a large profit out of it. Now, with evolving technology and the use of AI, several YouTube channels and social media platforms create video content that may satisfy the fans' demand for a reboot, but a big screen adaptation remains out of the question. Attempts, rumors, and rights issues. Recently, information surfaced surrounding Stephen King's lawyers contacting Warner Brothers regarding his rights to Shawshank Redemption. Apparently, King wanted to terminate the contract between him and the studio, reclaiming his rights to the novella. Now, this has sparked much speculation around a possible remake or a sequel of the film, but that might not be the case. After a long time, many authors like to reclaim their rights on their work if it's either unused or the studio tried to exploit or mishandle it. In some cases, Stephen King had creative differences with the studio's decision to adapt his works, as he didn't approve of the script for the first film adaptation of Carrie, causing him to restore his rights on many of his literary pieces from the production house. That might be another reason for him to terminate WB's rights on his work, so that he could use it to make further adaptations or just simply keep it from the studio's mismanagement. Marvelous verdict. Not just a cult classic, Shawshank Redemption became a pop culture phenomenon, having a huge impact on modern cinema, paving the way for more such prison escape stories to become a respected genre in cinematic history. Many modern films like 2013's Escape Plan or 2010's The Way Back echo the themes and storytelling style of Shawshank Redemption. The film kept on inspiring the modern generation of movie lovers and filmmakers to tell a human story that knows how to remain relevant over a long period without needing a franchise or a reboot to replace its evergreen presence. On that note, our video has come to an end. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below if you really want a reboot to this film. Until then, goodbye and see you in the next one.